Captain Dongwoo Kim watched the stars through the main window of his ship and felt peaceful for the first time in weeks, and the research vessel Aegis Dawn was moving slowly through space looking for good rocks that held valuable metals that Earth needed badly, and his crew was doing their job well like they always did. So Young Park was in the engine room checking every wire and every part to make sure nothing would break, and she was the best engineer Dongwoo had ever worked with, because she could fix anything and make it work better than before, and right now she was looking at the power systems and making small changes to make them run smoother. Taemin Lee was at his post watching the space around them through all the sensors and making sure they stayed on the right path through the dangerous asteroid field, and he was young, but very good at his job, and could spot trouble before anyone else could see it coming. And today he was being extra careful, because this part of space was new to all of them. Hee-jin Choi was listening to all the radio signals from space and making sure no other ships were nearby, and she was new to the crew, but Dongwoo liked her because she was smart and could understand alien languages faster than anyone he had ever met, and she always found interesting things in the signals that others missed. The asteroid field they were exploring was huge and full of rocks that might have the rare metals Earth needed for building better ships and weapons, and the mining companies back home would pay good money for the location of the best rocks. And that was why the Aegis Dawn was out here so far from home, in this empty part of space. Dongwoo had been a ship captain for 15 years and had seen many strange things in space, but this mission felt different somehow. And maybe it was because they were farther from Earth than he had ever been before. Or maybe it was because the government people who gave them this mission seemed worried about something they would not talk about. So Young came up to the bridge and told Dongwoo that the engines were running perfectly and the power systems had enough energy to last for months, and she had also checked the emergency systems and made sure the distress beacon was working properly, just in case something bad happened, and they needed help. Taemin was looking at his screens very carefully and told everyone that the asteroids in this area had good metals in them, and the scanners were showing lots of valuable stuff that would make the trip worth all the time and danger, and he was also watching for other ships, but space seemed empty, except for their small research vessel. Hee-jin was wearing her headphones and listening to the background noise of space, and most of the time it was just static and natural sounds from stars and planets, but sometimes she could hear signals from other ships or alien stations, and today she was hearing something new that made her feel worried, but she could not understand what it was yet. The crew worked together like a good team, and they had been on many missions together and trusted each other completely, and Dongwoo was proud of them because they were brave and smart and always did their best work even when things got dangerous and difficult. But then everything changed very fast, and Taemin saw something on his screens that made him shout and point at the window, and when everyone looked, they saw huge ships coming out of hyperspace all around them. And the ships were bigger than anything any of them had ever seen before, and they looked mean and dangerous. The alien ships were black and covered with spikes and weapons, and they moved in a way that showed they were military vessels built for fighting and destroying other ships, and there were at least 20 of them surrounding the little Aegis Dawn and blocking all the ways to escape. Dongwoo told his crew to stay calm and tried to contact the alien ships on the radio but got no answer, and he also tried to turn the ship around and fly away. But So Young told him that some kind of energy field was holding them in place, and the engines could not move the ship at all. The biggest alien ship came closer, and Dongwoo could see that it was covered with weapons and had strange writing on the side that looked like it was burned into the metal. And then a voice came over the radio speaking in a language that sounded harsh and angry and full of hate for other living things. Hee-jin worked fast to translate what the aliens were saying, and her face went white when she understood, and she told the others that the aliens were from something called the Vorthak Empire, and they were telling the humans to surrender or be destroyed immediately, and they seemed to think humans were weak and stupid. The alien voice spoke again, and this time, Hee-jin translated that they were calling humans a primitive species that would make good slaves, and that the Vorthak had heard about human technology, but did not believe humans were smart enough to be dangerous, and they wanted to capture the crew alive. Dongwoo felt angry but knew that his small research ship had no weapons and could not fight against so many big warships, and he also knew that his crew was more important than his pride, and he had to think about keeping them alive, even if it meant being captured by these aliens. So Young was looking at her control screens, and told Dongwu quietly that she might be able to send a message to Earth if she could get to the emergency communication system. But she would need time, and the aliens might stop her if they saw what she was doing. Taemin was still watching his sensors, and he told everyone that more alien ships were coming, and some of them were even bigger than the first ones, and they all had the same black color and spiky design, and they were surrounding the Aegis Dawn like hunters surrounding a trapped animal. The alien voice spoke again, and Heejin said they were giving the humans 1 minute to surrender and open their ship for boarding, and if they did not obey, then the aliens would destroy the Aegis Dawn and everyone on it and find other humans to capture instead. Dongwu looked at his crew and saw that they were all scared but still ready to follow his orders, and he felt proud of them and also felt responsible for getting them into this danger, and he had to make a choice that would affect all their lives and maybe their deaths too. He told So Young to send the emergency message to Earth as fast as she could, and he told Taemin to record everything the sensors were seeing so that maybe someone would know what happened to them, and he told Hyejin to keep listening to the aliens and try to learn more about them. So Young ran to the communication system and started working to send out the distress signal, and she put in all the information about where they were and what was happening, and she also included everything the sensors had learned about the alien ships and their weapons. But before she could finish sending the message, the alien ships fired some kind of energy beam at the Aegis Dawn, and all the power went out and the emergency lights came on, but most of the ship systems stopped working, and the artificial gravity got weak, making everyone feel dizzy. Then there was a loud noise, and the whole ship shook, and Dongwu knew that the aliens had attached something to his ship and were cutting through the hull to get inside, and he told his crew to stay together and be ready for anything but not to fight, because they would just get killed. Strange sounds came from the walls as the aliens cut their way into the ship, and then there was a hissing noise as they pumped something into the air, and Dongwu started feeling sleepy and weak, and he realized the aliens were using some kind of gas to make the humans unconscious. The last thing he saw, before everything went black, was alien soldiers in scary armor, breaking down the door to the bridge and pointing strange weapons at him and his crew. And one of the aliens was bigger than the others and had marks on his armor that probably meant he was the leader. When Dongwu woke up, he was lying on a cold metal floor in a dark room, and his hands were tied behind his back, and he could hear So Young and Taemin and Hyejin nearby, but he could not see them clearly because the room was too dark and his head hurt from the alien gas. He tried to remember what had happened, and slowly it all came back to him, and he realized that he and his crew were now prisoners of the Vorthak Empire, and he wondered if So Young had been able to send the distress message to Earth before the aliens stopped her, and if anyone would ever know what happened to the crew of the Aegis Dawn. The alien ship was bigger inside than Dongwu had expected, and the walls were made of some kind of black metal that seemed to absorb light and make everything look darker and scarier, and the air smelled bad, like chemicals and burnt metal, and something else that made him want to throw up. Guards with weapons pushed Dongwu and his crew through long hallways that all looked the same, and had strange writing on the walls that glowed with a red light, and the guards were tall and covered in armor that made them look like metal monsters, and they never spoke or made any sounds except for their heavy footsteps. So Young was walking next to Dongwu, and she whispered that she had managed to send part of the distress message before the aliens cut the power, and she hoped it would be enough for someone on Earth to know what happened to them and where they were when they got captured. Hyejin was listening to everything the alien guards were saying to each other, and she told the others quietly that the aliens thought humans were weak and stupid like most other species they had captured, and they were planning to use the humans as slaves in their minds on a prison planet. Taemin was looking at everything around them and trying to remember the layout of the alien ship, and he noticed that the guards seemed to follow the same paths every time, and that some doors were left open while others had special locks, and he thought this information might be useful later. They were taken to a big room where other aliens in fancy uniforms were waiting, and one of them was obviously the leader because he had more decorations on his armor, and the other aliens stood straighter when he was around, and he looked at the humans like they were insects. The leader alien spoke, and Hyejin translated that his name was Thex9, and he was a commander in the Vorthak military, and he was very interested in human technology, but did not think much of humans themselves, and he believed they would break easily under hard work and bad treatment. Thex9 walked around the humans and looked at them carefully, and he seemed disappointed that they were not bigger or stronger, and he made comments about how soft they looked and how they probably could not work very hard before they died, and this made the other aliens laugh in a cruel way. But then Thex-9 noticed that the humans were not acting scared like most prisoners did, and Dongwu was standing straight and looking right back at him without fear. And this seemed to make the alien commander angry because he was used to prisoners who begged and cried. So Young was examining the alien technology around the room, and she could see that their equipment was advanced, but also badly designed. And she noticed several things that could be improved with better engineering, and she wondered if the aliens knew how inefficient their systems were. The aliens put metal bands around the wrists of each human, and Thex-9 explained, through Hyojin, that these were slave collars that would hurt them if they tried to escape or fight, and they also had tracking devices, so the humans could never hide anywhere on the ship or on the prison planet. Then they were taken to another room that was full of cages, and there were already many other aliens locked up, and these prisoners were from different species, and they all looked tired and hopeless, and some of them had been there so long they seemed half crazy. Dongwu and his crew were put in a cage together, and they could see that the other prisoners were scared of the guards and would not look at them directly, and many of them had scars and injuries from being treated badly, and it was clear that the Vorthak were cruel masters. An old alien who looked like a lizard with two heads was in the cage next to them, and he could speak some basic human language, and he told them that his name was Velthar, and he had been a prisoner for many years, and that the Vorthak captured entire planets and made all the people into slaves. Velthar explained that they were being taken to a planet called Keth 7, which was a mining world where prisoners had to dig for valuable crystals in dangerous tunnels, and many prisoners died from the hard work or the poisonous air, and the Vorthak did not care, because there were always more prisoners to replace the dead ones. The old lizard also told them that the Vorthak thought they were the most advanced species in the galaxy, and that all other species were meant to serve them, and they had conquered hundreds of worlds and enslaved millions of beings, and no one had ever been able to stop them. So Young asked Velthar about the prison planet and what the working conditions were like, and the old alien told her that the mines were deep underground and the air was full of dust that made it hard to breathe, and the crystals they had to dig gave off radiation that slowly killed the workers. Tae Min wanted to know about the guards and the security systems, and Velthar said that the Vorthak were overconfident and did not think prisoners could ever escape, so they did not watch them very carefully, and the security was strong but not as smart as it could be. Hyojin was still listening to the alien guards, and she learned that there were thousands of prisoners on Keth 7, and they were from dozens of different species, and most of them had given up hope of ever being free, and they just worked until they died. The journey to Keth 7 took several days, and during that time the humans got to know some of the other prisoners, and they learned that most species just accepted their fate when they were captured, and never tried to fight back or escape because they thought it was hopeless. But Dongwu noticed that his crew was different from the other prisoners, and they were not giving up, and they were still thinking and planning and looking for ways to improve their situation, and this gave him hope that maybe humans were stronger than other species in ways the Vorthak did not understand. So Young spent her time studying the alien technology she could see and figuring out how it worked, and she found several weaknesses in their systems that could be exploited if someone knew what they were doing, and she started making mental notes about everything she observed. Taemin was mapping the alien ship in his mind and learning the guard schedules, and he discovered that the aliens were very predictable in their routines, and they always did things the same way because they thought no prisoner was smart enough to notice patterns. Hyojin was learning more of the Vorthak language, and she found out that they had a very rigid social system where everyone had a specific rank, and they never questioned orders from someone higher than them, and this made them strong, but also gave them blind spots. During the journey, the humans also learned from Velthar that the Vorthak Empire was huge and covered hundreds of star systems, and they had been expanding for thousands of years, and they believed that nothing could stop them from taking over the entire galaxy. The old lizard told them stories about other species that had tried to fight the Vorthak and failed, and he said that some species were stronger than humans and some were smarter, but they all ended up as slaves because they could not work together or think of new solutions to old problems. But when Velthar looked at the humans, he said that their was something different about them, and they did not act like other prisoners, and they seemed to have a kind of strength that was not about muscles or weapons, but about something inside their minds and hearts. Finally, the ship arrived at Keth 7, and through the windows the humans could see that it was a dark, ugly planet with no plants or water, and the surface was covered with mines and factories and prison buildings, and the sky was brown from all the dust and smoke. Thex 9 came to see the prisoners before they were taken to the planet's surface, and he looked especially at the humans and told them that they would learn to serve the Vorthak Empire, or they would die in the mines, and either way the Vorthak would benefit from their capture. The alien commander also said that Earth would be next, and that the Vorthak had learned the location of the human homeworld from the ship computers, and soon there would be many more human slaves working in the mines, and this made Dongwu angry, but he kept quiet. When they were taken off the ship and onto the planet's surface, the humans got their first real look at what their lives would be like, and they saw thousands of prisoners from many different species all working in terrible conditions and being watched by Vorthak guards with weapons. The air was hard to breathe, and everything was covered with dust, and the sound of digging and machinery never stopped, and there were no plants or anything beautiful anywhere, and it was like a vision of hell made real. But as they were marched toward the prison buildings, Dongwu looked at his crew and saw that they were still alert and still thinking, and he realized that the Vorthak had made their first big mistake when they decided that humans would be easy to break. 3 months had passed since the humans arrived on Keth 7, and everything had changed in ways that the Vorthak guards could not understand and did not like, and the prison that had been quiet and hopeless for many years was now full of strange, new energy that made the alien overseers nervous. Dongwu had become a leader among the prisoners, not by forcing anyone to follow him, but by showing them that there were always ways to make things better, and he spent his time talking to aliens from every species and learning about their abilities and their knowledge and their dreams of freedom. The old lizard Velthar had become like a grandfather to the humans, and he knew more about the prison than anyone else, and he told them about secret passages and weak spots in the security systems and places where the guards never looked, and he was amazed that the humans actually listened and remembered everything. So Young had been assigned to work in the maintenance section, where she fixed broken equipment, and she had learned that the entire prison ran on one big fusion reactor that was poorly designed and badly maintained, and she started making small changes that looked like normal repairs, but were actually preparations for something much bigger. Timon was working with the communication systems that the guards used to talk to each other, and he had figured out all their schedules and their patrol routes and their emergency procedures, and he also discovered that they had the same password for everything, because they thought prisoners were too stupid to notice. Hai Jin had been put in the slave processing center, where new prisoners arrived, and she could listen to all the radio traffic between the guard stations and the main command center, and she learned that Earth was still free, but the Vorthak invasion fleet was almost ready to attack. But the most important thing that happened was that the humans had started teaching other species things that no one had ever taught them before, and they showed the Yith how their natural camouflage could be used for more than just hiding, and they taught the strong Corvin how to use their strength more effectively. The humans also taught the Mylari how their perfect memories could be used to coordinate complex plans, and they showed the energy-sensitive Zek how to detect weaknesses in electronic systems, and slowly all the different species started working together instead of just suffering alone. So Young had been sharing her engineering knowledge with anyone who wanted to learn, and she taught simple sabotage techniques disguised as maintenance tips, and she showed other prisoners how to make small tools and weapons from scrap metal and broken equipment. The prison machinery had started breaking down more often, and the guards thought it was just bad luck or old equipment. But really, it was because So Young had taught dozens of prisoners how to cause problems that looked like accidents, and the Vorthak were spending more and more time fixing things. Dongwu had organized the prisoners into small groups that could communicate with each other through hand signals and coded messages, and each group had prisoners from different species, so they could use all their special abilities, and they practiced working together during their rest periods. Taemin had figured out how to listen to the guard communications without being detected, and he learned that the guards were getting reports about problems in other parts of the prison, but they thought each problem was separate, and they did not realize that everything was connected. The guards had also started complaining to each other that the prisoners were acting differently, and some of the aliens who had been broken and hopeless for years were now standing straighter and working with more energy, and this made the Vorthak suspicious, but they could not figure out what was happening. Hyojin had intercepted a message that made her very worried because it said that the Vorthak invasion fleet would attack Earth in just 3 months, and the fleet was huge and carried enough weapons to destroy entire cities, and millions of humans would die or become slaves. She also learned that Thex-9 was going to be promoted to lead the advanced scouts to Earth, and he was bragging about how he would capture more humans for the slave camps, and this news made all the humans angry and determined to do something to stop the invasion. The breaking point came when Thex-9 decided that the humans were causing trouble and needed to be taught a lesson, and he ordered that Taimin should be executed in front of all the prisoners as a warning about what happened to troublemakers. The alien commander thought that killing one human would make the others afraid and obedient, but he did not understand that humans became more dangerous when their friends were threatened, and that the other species had learned from the humans that some things were worth fighting for. When the guards came to take Taimin to the execution platform, Dongwu gave a signal that had been planned for weeks, and suddenly prisoners all over the prison started acting at the same time, and the Vorthak guards found themselves facing something they had never seen before, which was organized resistance. So Young activated all the sabotage devices she had built into the prison systems, and the fusion reactor began to overload, and the lights started flickering, and the security doors began opening and closing randomly, and the guard communications went dead. Min broke free from his guards using techniques that Dongwu had taught him, and he ran to the nearest control station and used his knowledge of the security systems to turn off the prisoner tracking devices and unlock all the cell doors at once. Hyojin took control of the prison communication center and sent out a message to every prisoner in the complex, telling them that the time for freedom had come and that they should follow the escape plans that had been secretly shared over the past months. The Yith used their camouflage to become invisible, and they attacked guards who could not see them coming, and the Corvin used their great strength to break through barriers that the Vorthak thought were unbreakable, and the Mylari coordinated everything with their perfect memories of all the plans. Prisoners who had been hopeless and broken just hours before were suddenly fighting with courage they did not know they had, and they were using weapons made from mining tools, and they were working together like they had been soldiers all their lives. The Vorthak guards were completely surprised because in all their history of conquest they had never seen slaves fight back in an organized way, and they had no procedures for dealing with a real rebellion, and their rigid command structure made it hard for them to adapt quickly. Thex-9 was in his command center when the rebellion started, and he could not believe what he was seeing on his monitors because it looked like every prisoner in the complex had gone crazy at the same time, and his guards were being overwhelmed everywhere. He called for reinforcements from other parts of the prison and from the orbital stations, but Hyojin was intercepting all his communications and sending false orders that confused the Vorthak military response and made their reinforcements go to the wrong places. So Young had taken over the main engineering section with a team of prisoners who had learned her sabotage techniques, and they were systematically shutting down the systems that the guards needed to maintain control, and they were also building real weapons from the fusion reactor components. The rebellion spread through the entire prison complex like fire spreading through dry grass, and everywhere the Vorthak looked, they saw prisoners fighting with skills and coordination that no slave species had ever shown before. Velthar was leading a group of older prisoners who had thought they would die in captivity, and now they were fighting for freedom with energy they had not felt in years. And the old lizard told everyone he met that the humans had given them something more valuable than weapons, which was hope. The guards tried to re-establish control by threatening to kill prisoners, but they discovered that the rebels had already freed everyone and taken control of the execution areas, and the prison armory and the communication centers. Thex-9 realized that he was losing control of the entire prison, and in his rage and frustration, he decided to challenge Dongwu to single combat because he believed that his advanced armor and weapons would easily defeat a weak human and that killing the human leader would end the rebellion. But Thex-9 did not understand that the rebellion was not really about one leader, but about an idea that the humans had brought to Keth-7, which was that freedom was possible if people were willing to work together and fight for it. When the alien commander stepped onto the main prison floor to face Dongwu, the fighting stopped, and thousands of prisoners gathered to watch, and they knew that this moment would decide whether they would win their freedom or die trying. The main prison floor had become a battlefield, but now everything was quiet as thousands of freed prisoners formed a circle around Dongwu and Thex9, and the only sounds were the sparking of damaged electrical systems and the heavy breathing of beings who had been fighting for their lives. Thex9 was wearing full battle armor that was covered with weapons and energy shields, and he looked like a walking tank that could destroy anything in his path, and his armor was black with red markings that showed his high rank in the Vorthak military, and he moved with the confidence of someone who had never lost a fight. Dongwu had only the simple prison clothes and basic tools that So Young had made for him, and he looked small compared to the alien commander, but his eyes were calm and focused, and he stood straight without fear, and everyone watching could see that he was ready for whatever would happen. The alien commander activated his weapon systems, and energy began crackling around his armor, and he spoke in his harsh language, telling Dongwu that he would die slowly as punishment for starting the rebellion, and that all the other prisoners would be executed after they watched their leader die. Hyejin translated the threats, but Dongwu just nodded and said that some things were worth dying for and that the idea of freedom could not be killed, even if he could be, and his calm words made the other prisoners stand straighter and feel braver. Thex9 attacked first, using energy bolts from his arm weapons, but Dongwu had learned from Tae-min how to read the alien technology, and he rolled aside just as the bolts fired and the energy blast hit the wall behind him and left smoking holes in the metal. The human captain moved fast and used the mining equipment around the floor for cover, and he threw metal scraps at the alien to distract him, and he stayed low and kept moving, because he knew that his only advantage was being smaller and quicker than his enemy. So Young had taught Dongwu about the weaknesses in Vorthak armor design, and he aimed his improvised weapons at the joints where the armor pieces connected and at the sensor arrays that the alien needed to target his weapons effectively. The alien commander became angry when his first attacks missed, and he started firing wildly and using more powerful weapons. But this made his armor systems overheat, and Dongwu could see steam coming from the cooling vents, and he knew that the alien was making mistakes. Velthar was watching the fight and telling the other prisoners about human tactics and how Dongwu was using his brain instead of just his strength, and the old lizard had never seen anything like it, because most species just tried to hit harder when they were in trouble. The fight continued for many minutes, and Thex9 kept using his superior weapons and armor, but Dongwu kept avoiding the attacks and slowly wearing down the alien systems, and he was also learning the patterns of how the alien moved and how his weapons worked. Then Dongwu did something that surprised everyone, including Thex9, and instead of running away from the alien, he ran straight at him and jumped up onto his back before the heavy armor could turn around, and he started pulling at the control cables that So Young had told him about. The alien spun around trying to throw off the human, but Dongwu held on tight and used a small metal tool to damage the main power connection to the alien weapons, and suddenly the energy shields went down and the arm cannon stopped working. Thex9 grabbed Dongwu with his armored hands and threw him across the room, but the human rolled when he hit the ground and came up ready to keep fighting, and now the alien had to rely on just his physical strength instead of all his advanced technology. The alien commander was bigger and stronger than Dongwu, but his heavy armor made him slow and clumsy, and the human was able to stay out of reach while attacking the damaged parts of the armor system and making the problems worse. So Young was watching from the crowd, and she could see that the alien armor was failing in exactly the ways she had predicted, and she shouted advice to Dongwu about which systems to target next and how to cause a complete power failure. The other prisoners were cheering for Dongwu, and they could hardly believe that a human without weapons or armor was actually winning a fight against a Vorthak commander, and they started to understand that the aliens were not as invincible as everyone had believed. Thex9 was getting desperate because his armor was shutting down piece by piece, and he could not understand how a primitive human was defeating advanced Vorthak technology, and he made one final attempt to crush Dongwu with his bare hands. But Dongwu was ready for this attack, and he used the alien momentum against him and pulled him off balance, and Thex9 fell hard onto the metal floor, and his damaged armor finally gave up completely and all the systems went dead. The alien commander tried to get up, but his armor had become dead weight, and he could barely move, and Dongwu stood over him and told him that humans did not give up, and that the Vorthak had made a big mistake when they decided to make enemies of Earth. The watching prisoners erupted in cheers and celebration because they had just seen the impossible happen, and a human had defeated a Vorthak commander in single combat, and this victory proved that the aliens could be beaten, and that freedom was really possible. Timon had been working on the prison control systems during the fight, and he announced that all the security locks were disabled, and all the prisoners were free to move anywhere in the complex, and the guard communication systems were under rebel control. So Young reported that the main power systems were stable and under their control, and she had teams working to convert the prison defenses into weapons that could be used against any Vorthak reinforcements that might arrive. Hyojin had taken over the communication center completely, and she was monitoring all Vorthak military channels, and she reported that reinforcement ships were coming. But they were still several hours away, and the rebels had time to prepare. The freed prisoners organized themselves into work teams, and they followed the plans that had been developed during the months of secret preparation, and they took control of every important system in the prison complex. Some prisoners worked on converting mining equipment into weapons, and others worked on repairing and modifying the few Vorthak ships that were docked at the prison, and still others worked on fortifying the prison buildings. For Defense Velthar became the coordinator for all the non-human species, and he made sure that everyone understood their role in the defense plans, and he also organized teams to help wounded prisoners and to distribute food and medical supplies. The humans took charge of the technical operations because they understood the alien systems better than anyone else, and they worked with teams of prisoners from other species to make sure that every system was working properly. Within hours, the prison had been transformed from a place of slavery into a fortress of freedom, and the former prisoners now controlled everything, and they had weapons and defenses, and most importantly, they had hope and determination. Word of the victory spread to other parts of Keth 7, and prisoners in distant mining camps heard that the main prison had been liberated, and they started their own rebellions, and soon the entire planet was in revolt against the Vorthak. So Young had discovered that there were many Vorthak ships in the orbital shipyards and repair facilities, and these ships could be captured and used to spread the rebellion to other worlds, and maybe even to defend Earth from the coming invasion. The rebels now faced a choice between trying to escape to safety or staying to fight the Vorthak reinforcements, and when Dongwu asked for volunteers to stay and fight, every single prisoner stepped forward because they had learned from the humans that some battles were worth fighting no matter what the odds. Thex 9 was locked in a cell that had once held human prisoners, and he could not believe that his mighty empire was being challenged by slaves who should have been grateful for the opportunity to serve the Vorthak. And he wondered what kind of species these humans really were, as the freed prisoners prepared for the next battle. They knew that they had already won something important, because they had proven to themselves and to the galaxy that the Vorthak could be defeated. And that freedom was not just a dream, but something that could be fought for and won. The rebellion that had started with 4 captured humans had grown into something that would change the entire galaxy, and the Vorthak Empire would never be the same because they had made the mistake of trying to enslave the one species that would never accept defeat. The Vorthak reinforcement fleet arrived at Keth 7 expecting to find a small prisoner riot that could be easily crushed, but instead they found a fully organized rebellion that controlled the entire planet and had converted the prison facilities into military bases, and the fleet commander Corv 12 could not understand how slaves had accomplished such an impossible thing. Dongwu stood in the main command center that had once belonged to Thex 9 and looked at the screens showing the approaching enemy ships, and he knew that this battle would decide not just the fate of the freed prisoners, but also the future of Earth, and maybe the freedom of the entire galaxy. So Young had been working without sleep for days to modify captured Vorthak ships and weapons, and she had teams of engineers from 12 different species helping her. And together they had created hybrid technology that combined the best ideas from all the rebel species and was better than anything the Vorthak had ever built. The captured ships had been fitted with improved shields and weapons systems and better engines, and most importantly, they had crews that were fighting for freedom instead of conquest. And so Young believed that this made all the difference. In how well the ships would perform, Taemin was coordinating the defense of the planet's surface and the rebel fleet in space, and he had learned so much about Vorthak military tactics that he could predict what they would do before they did it, and he used this knowledge to set traps and ambushes. Hyojin had been broadcasting messages to the entire galaxy telling the story of the Keth 7 rebellion and calling on all enslaved peoples to rise up against their Vorthak masters, and her broadcasts were being heard on hundreds of worlds and giving hope to billions of oppressed beings. Velthar was leading a council of representatives from every species on Keth 7, and they had agreed to fight together as equals instead of following the rigid hierarchy that the Vorthak used, and this cooperation made their forces much more flexible and creative. The battle began when the Vorthak fleet opened fire on the planet expecting to destroy the rebellion quickly, but they found that the rebels had turned the mining facilities into underground fortresses that could withstand orbital bombardment, and the surface defenses fired back with weapons that were more accurate than anything the Vorthak had seen before. In space, the rebel fleet met. The Vorthak ships and the enemy commanders were shocked to discover that the former prisoners were using advanced tactics and coordinated attacks and hybrid technology that made their ships perform better than standard Vorthak vessels. Admiral Korv 12 had expected to fight desperate slaves with captured weapons, but instead he was fighting a well-organized military force that seemed to anticipate his every move and counter his strategies before he could implement them. The rebel ships moved in formations that no Vorthak commander had ever seen before, and they used hit-and-run tactics and coordinated group attacks and electronic warfare that disrupted Vorthak communications and targeting systems. So Young had installed new computer systems in the rebel ships that could share information instantly between all vessels so that every ship knew what every other ship was doing, and this gave them a huge advantage over the Vorthak fleet, which relied on slow hierarchical command structures. The battle raged for hours, and the Vorthak ships were being destroyed or disabled faster than their commanders could believe, and Admiral Korv 12 realized that he was not just fighting a rebellion, but a revolution that had created entirely new ways of warfare. Dongwu was commanding the rebel fleet from the captured flagship, and he was using strategies that combined human military theory with the special abilities of all the allied species, and the result was a fighting force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Yith ships could become invisible and attack without warning, and the Korvan ships could ram through Vorthak shields with their reinforced hulls, and the Malari ships could coordinate complex battle plans with perfect precision, and the Zek ships could disable enemy systems with their energy manipulation abilities. As the battle continued, more rebel ships arrived from other parts of Keth 7 and from nearby systems where the rebellion had spread, and Admiral Korv 12 found himself outnumbered by an enemy that was getting stronger, while his own forces were being steadily destroyed. The turning point came when Hyojin managed to break into the Vorthak military communication network and broadcast a message to all the Vorthak ships telling them about the rebellion and showing them footage of Thex 9 being defeated by a human, and explaining that their empire was built on lies about alien inferiority. Some of the Vorthak crews began to doubt their commanders, and a few ships even switched sides when they realized that the rebels were offering freedom and equality. Instead of the rigid oppression of the Vorthak system, Admiral Korv 12 made a desperate attempt to break through the rebel defenses and destroy the planet's surface, but Taemin had predicted this move, and the planet-based weapons were ready, and they damaged the Admiral flagship so badly that it had to retreat. The Vorthak fleet was in complete disarray, and many ships were trying to escape, while others were surrendering and still others were fighting each other, as different crews made different decisions about whether to continue serving the Empire. Dongwu ordered the rebel fleet to let the fleeing Vorthak ships go, because he wanted them to carry the news back to the Empire that the rebellion was real and growing, and that the age of Vorthak supremacy was ending. In the aftermath of the battle, the rebels found themselves in control of dozens of Vorthak warships and thousands of prisoners and vast amounts of advanced technology. And they also had something even more valuable, which was proof that the Vorthak could be defeated. News of the victory spread across the galaxy faster than anyone had expected, and on world after, world-enslaved populations rose up in rebellion, and Vorthak garrisons found themselves facing coordinated uprisings that used the tactics and strategies developed at Keth 7. The Vorthak Empire began to collapse as more and more systems declared their independence, and the rigid military structure that had once been their strength became a weakness because it could not adapt fast enough to deal with so many simultaneous rebellions. So Young led a team of engineers and scientists from many species to study captured Vorthak technology and reverse engineer their most advanced systems, and they made rapid progress because they were working together instead of competing, and they shared all their discoveries freely. Within months, the rebellion had grown into a galactic alliance that included hundreds of species working together as equals, and they had created new technologies and new forms of government and new ways of cooperation that were far superior to anything the Vorthak had achieved. The Vorthak invasion fleet that had been prepared to attack Earth never launched because the Empire was too busy fighting rebellions throughout its territory, and eventually the fleet itself mutinied and joined the alliance. Dongwu and his crew finally returned to Earth as heroes, but they were more proud of what they had accomplished for the galaxy than of their own survival. And they brought with them representatives from dozens of species and technologies that would benefit all of humanity. Earth became a founding member of the new Galactic Alliance, and humans took their place as equals among the free peoples of the galaxy, and the alliance was built on the principles that the humans had taught at Keth 7, which were cooperation and equality, and the belief that freedom was worth fighting for. Hai Jin wrote the official history of the rebellion, and she made sure to record that it had succeeded not because humans were superior to other species, but because humans had shown other species that they were not inferior to anyone, and that together they could accomplish anything. The story of Keth 7 became legend throughout the galaxy, and it was told to children of every species as an example of what could be achieved when people refused to accept oppression and worked together for freedom. Thex 9 spent the rest of his life in the same cell where he had once planned to imprison humans, and he never understood that the Vorthak had lost not because they were defeated in battle, but because they had never learned that strength comes from unity and cooperation rather than domination and fear. Years later, when Dongwu was asked what had made the rebellion successful, he said that the Vorthak had made one fatal mistake, and when they captured 4 humans thinking they were getting slaves, they had actually captured the most dangerous thing in the universe, which was the human refusal to accept that freedom was impossible. The rebellion had started when the Vorthak tried to seize humans who would not be broken, and it had ended with the transformation of the entire galaxy and the birth of a new age where all species could live free and work together as equals and partners in building a better future for everyone.